waiting room or people popping in?
They might, no. They might from time to time. Hey, this is Michael Davis. Welcome to our Friday 3 Questions to Better Business. This week, we're going to talk all about the Great Resignation. How do you keep your best employees during the Great Resignation? And joining me is a woman I've known for just a short time, but I was so impressed the first time we talked. I said, you've got to come on and let's do the interview with 3 questions. Liz Mohler, great to have you from the West Coast. I hope you're dried out.
I am. I did get caught in that horrible storm because I was in San Francisco over that stormy time. And it was really nice to come back to Southern California where the rain had passed through. So
Good.
we love having the rain. We need the rain, but
Yeah.
it did, throw a wrench into my plants up in San Francisco. So
it would be great if Mother Nature would dole that out in smaller quantities more evenly.
exactly. Well, what was interesting, 3 days staying in Marin Valley, and our third day, because it was raining, we'd gone into the city, went to a museum, had lunch, we were having a great time, went back to get to our Airbnb, and the highway was closed. And we had to call up our friend from lunch and say, hey, can we come back to the city and stay at your house because we can't get to Marin Valley. We couldn't get to Sausalito. And then the next day, because we changed our plans, we drove down Highway 1, the scenic route through Big Sur. And the road, we kept having to stop, and people in front of us got out of their cars and they were moving rocks to the side of the road. And we checked into the Ragged Mountain Inn in Big Sur. And the guy checking us in was like, did you feel the earthquake 30 minutes ago? And we were like, no. Is that why all those rocks had tumbled onto Highway 1? So I think Mother Nature was like tapping us on the shoulder to give us a message to keep moving along. So
she was a bit cranky last weekend, wasn't she?
Yes, it was crazy. Absolutely.
She's
crazy.
allowed to. She's allowed to. If you'd like to join us, we'd be more than happy to have you join us with just livewithspeakingcpr.com. All right, Liz, let's get into these 3 big questions all about 3 keys to better business. First question is, what is the root cause of the Great Resignation?
The root cause. Well, I think we need to blame it all on COVID, because COVID came and it just warped our world. And I say world because it was a global pandemic. COVID-19 came in and it did not leave quickly. It has challenged everyone. And as they say, it was not just the United States, it was around the world. And it wasn't just kids that were affected because schools closed and students went online. It was adults that were affected because of their jobs. And even those of us that are resilient and could pivot, you and I embraced the Zoom world. I don't consider myself a television personality. This is my home. I'm Zooming from home. But we've all had to take some changes and embrace them. So the Great Resignation is that a lot of people are just resigning to the fact that the life has changed and the world of work has changed. And for many people, that meant they lost their jobs. They were furloughed, they were put on hiatus, or they were terminated. And so the Great Resignation was forced upon a lot of people. And then as we come out of the COVID pandemic, hopefully people are getting vaccinated. We're still wearing masks. Some people are just choosing not to go back. And so the Great Resignation makes everybody at every level, blue collar, white collar, really reevaluate their careers and their jobs. And so they're quitting, and they're not wanting to go back and do what they used to do.
It wasn't just a physical pandemic, was it? It really triggered an emotional pandemic.
Absolutely. A lot of people really lost their footing, and it's been a very, very emotionally challenging time. As a career coach, as a life coach, I work with clients that are going through life stage changes. So recent college graduates to people at the midlife crisis where they're at break point. And so, yeah, it didn't just physically affect them and health wise. People had friends that died. People had friends that got very, very sick. I think we've all lost somebody. I mean, I know that my father passed away and my father-in-law passed away. So they'd lived good long lives. They were 86 and 91, but we're also losing young people. And so people start to really mentally reevaluate, is this all there is in life? And why am I working so hard? Why am I killing myself at this job when I could be gone tomorrow. Definitely.
Yes, especially for somebody who may not appreciate me. And I've contended, and now I'm looking at the speaking world now.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to say COVID was the cause. However, I've noticed in the speaking world, I think COVID was just a time accelerator. And what I mean by that is I would go to networking events in 2019 because I had been coaching virtually for 2 years at that point.
Yeah.
I'd go to these networking events and I'd talk to people. I'd say, hey, Liz, you really should consider virtual meetings.
Yeah.
They're really time effective, at least in the beginning. And I know eventually we need to meet face to face. And I always got the same answer. Kidding, Michael? I could never do that. I have to be in front of people.
Right.
And I would tell them, look, I get that feeling, but it's coming. It may take 10, 15 years, but get used to it. Of course, not knowing what was about to hit us. It just sped up time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, as a professional speaker, I had 17 speaking engagements on my calendar. And I was so excited because some of those speaking engagements I'd kind of double booked, where I was going to speak at one place and then speak at another place, same agenda, same curriculum. And I was like, woohoo, show me the money, because it was all blocked in and I had my calendar set, and all 17 speaking engagements disappeared. And I remember being a little bit in shock when one of my clients called back and said, will you speak online? Will you go on Zoom? And historically, I thought, no, I don't want to be recorded on YouTube. I don't want to be on Zoom, because if you get my whole speech, if you get my best stuff, then you won't pay for it later. And he pointed out, he said, we don't know when later will come. We need you now. And my background is career development and career coaching. And he was like, think of all those laid off, unemployed people. They need to hear from you. So I went ahead and said yes. And they actually went ahead, and I've had this contract for 10 years. They tripled my day rate, tripled it, because they took into consideration that I wasn't going to get as many speaking opportunities. But I think they also looked at their budget that they'd already planned for. And they said, you know what, we have this budget to spend. And she's one of the few speakers who's willing to get on Zoom, because some of those other speakers said, I don't want to go on Zoom. I'm not ready. And I said, I'm not ready, but I do have the knowledge, I do have the information, and I do have a message to share. So I'll go ahead and give you a link to post to the audience for the YouTube video. It's not professional, but the content is the same. The content is there. So
yeah, that's the one you sent me earlier today.
I did.
Yeah, I'll make sure that's in the show notes. You hit on something so critical that I've observed, and I'm going to speak selfishly for a moment. COVID was a windfall for my business because I was doing speaking and coaching virtually. I was accustomed to it. And I knew those conversations I'd had in 2019, I absolutely knew that the majority of people around the world were going to be in full-fledged panic mode. And experienced professional speakers dropped off. And I think it's because they made a huge mistake in their assumption that it's all about me, the speaker.
Yep.
And I was fortunate. I have great mentors along the way, still do. And they taught me, look, ultimately, people do not care if they get your message from you on stage, you on camera, you in a video program, an audio program, a book, or a PDF. That's all they care about.
Absolutely.
Can you add spice to it? Absolutely. But don't confuse the message and, to your point, the value with how they got it.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think there's so many people out there, business owners, managers, who really were kind of waiting for things to go back to normal. And when is COVID going to be over? And I think as we settle into the period we're in now, we're not going to see the end of this. It's just the beginning. And like you said, it's green lighted and fast forwarded a whole change in a lot of different industries. And the Great Resignation has really forced some people to kind of go, wait a minute, is my company keeping up with those changes, or is my company falling behind? And now the really good companies are hiring. The Amazons of the world are desperate to hire good people. And as I noticed just walking around my neighborhood, some restaurants are surviving and adapting, and others are floundering and failing. So that Great Resignation means people have some flexibility and some freedom to quit a job because there's a better job out there with a better boss, a better management team starting to pivot and look ahead.
Great point. And I have some clients who are in the restaurant business who are thriving again because they pivoted and made some big changes. All right, that leads us to our second question, which is, how can you move past retention of employees to inspiring them so they want to stay?
That's a great question. And I think that it comes from within, first of all. Are you feeling like you're just in retention mode, or are you in inspiration mode? And so a lot of the work I do one-on-one with my private clients is I help them figure out the answer to what I call the $1 million question. And the $1 million question is, what exactly are you looking for? What do you want out of your life? What inspires you? What motivates you? Because if you're inspired and motivated, it's going to trickle down to your employees. So if you're a boss, if you're a supervisor, if you're trying to motivate others to be the best they can be, you kind of have to look within and ask yourself, what am I doing to be the best that I can be? So that it's like parenting. We try to lead by example. We try to show people through our actions and our activities how we can be better. So that's kind of a starting point. I would say the second part of it is, as a manager or a boss, is to actually take some time to ask your employees how they're doing and why they're working where they are, what they really enjoy about their jobs, and then listen and see if you can help them get on a path that's going to make them happier, more successful, more fulfilled. Because if they're happier in their jobs, they're going to work better. If they're happier with their coworkers and they're communicating with their colleagues, they're going to work better. So it's that transition first within, and then sharing that knowledge and that information going forward.
I love that response, Liz, because I've been on a really kick lately. I've focused on this a lot, even as speakers and storytellers, taking the time to understand what your audience really needs. And that involves asking questions, as you just pointed out, but not just accepting the face answer you get. So, for example, if a boss goes to an employee and says, well, why are you still working here? What do you like about it? What makes me happy? Oh, that's great. Next question. Stop.
Right.
Don't put your filter of happy on them. Ask them, what exactly makes you happy? What are 3 things here that make you happy? And the answers you get will probably astound you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do an exercise with core values, and I tell my clients, these are 20 core values. What's most important to you? But also, do you know what's most important to your boss or your boss's boss or the people that report to you? Because if their values are motivation and inspiration by making money and closing deals and relationships, and your motivation is regulation and rules and having some consistency, you may be at odds with the people that you're working with. So listening and getting their stories and getting their examples can really, open up some lines of communication that haven't been opened before, because people make assumptions. We assume that we all want the same thing, and that is not the truth. That is not the case.
Wow, that's a fantastic point. We all have our filter, and because we live in such a high-paced world and we fall into that trap, you say a word that triggers something in me. Oh, she's happy. She's satisfied. I put my experience on that word, and I think I know what you mean. And wow, no, you don't. And do you find that people often push back and say, well, that takes some time. I don't know that I have the time to do that.
I get that a little bit with managers, and I talk about the fact that is an investment at the beginning to really get to know somebody, because once you get to know them, you can dig a little deeper into what do they like, because once you get to know them, you start to like them, then you get to the trust. And I do have a lot of managers who are like, flip it. I just need them to trust me. I'm the boss. And I'm like, yeah, but you haven't earned that trust. They've only gotten to know you superficially. So it's really a simple concept of know, like, and trust. But it comes up time and time again in helping people open lines of communication. And so I think it goes back to what you do really well, which is the storytelling. We don't really know someone until we know what they like. And then we can determine whether we trust them based on, do they say they like it or do they show it? How do they convey that? How is that communicated? So
Yeah, and it was just, I was reminded of that recently when I did some TEDx coaching. I do TEDx Cincinnati, and they just had their TEDx Women event. And all three of my speakers, I take them back and say, what was it when you were a little girl that triggered that feeling or embedded that feeling and belief system in you so that you do what you do today?
Yeah.
And all three said essentially had the same response. Wow, I never thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what digging will do. And the reason I ask you if you get some pushback is if you do not do the investment up front, it's going to be very costly later.
Absolutely.
Miscommunication, lost deals, messed up projects, lost employees.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's really the first activity I will do with any group that I'm with is I'll encourage them to share what I call success stories. And I want to hear about their personal accomplishments, but I also want to hear about their organizational accomplishments. And I want to know if the mission of the organization is in alignment with all the contributors. And so pulling a group together that work together, but they really haven't talked individually about their individual contributions to the bigger goal. And until you get the stories from an organization, you really don't understand how all the different pieces fit together. So storytelling and accomplishments, success stories is a huge foundational piece to get people moving in the right direction.
Yeah, it really gets you to the core of the reason they do what they do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love the historical. I always ask my clients, what, as a kid, what did you really enjoy doing as a kid? And then I find the little threads that continue on, because if they were a curious, taking things apart, putting them back together, maybe that's something that they can carry forward into their next career. And a boss or a manager might just not even know that they like to do that. So smart bosses these days, a technique that I've coached some of my bosses and supervisors to do is to move their employees around, have them take on a special project with a different department or a different division. And it's a win-win because it gives their existing department a little bit of a break when their boss is removed and they have to step up and really deliver. It also gives that boss another perspective of a whole nother department or a whole nother division. And it also gets people more comfortable with change, because change is now a constant. But if a company can thrust you into change and then put you back where you were before, you will have stretched and grown in that new role with that new responsibility, and you're going to come back with some new insights. But you're also going to come back with a sense of, I can do it. So when a promotion is available and you've already tried living outside your comfort zone, and then you came back to where you were, you're a little more comfortable going forward. So sometimes I'll coach managers to manage their people in a little bit of a different way and sort of put out some of those challenges to their employees to take on a new project or a new activity, just to stretch and grow.
It strikes me that is a terrific method also to uncover some skill sets that maybe neither side knew this employee had. Absolutely. And all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe you need to be in management versus sales or whatever the example would be. So yeah, I love that exercise.
Yeah. And that's a great example, because one of the clients I was coaching, she's used to being in a position to train other people and teach them how to do things. And she actually works in a big, large government organization. She's part of the FDIC. And so when she has to move over and all of a sudden somebody's training her, it's like she's been put backwards into the seat of the learner. And so she's like, oh my gosh, I was thrown into this special project and I didn't get a lot of training and I didn't know the terminology. And as she went back to her job, she's now a little more tuned in to helping these new FDIC business government people transition. So they know the terminology and the acronyms. And she's like, yeah, because I know what it's like having been thrown into a new position. So it's sort of a win-win-win all around, that everybody can benefit from that.
I try to do that as a speaking coach. I take my coaching hat off and I say, I'm sitting in the third row of the audience and I'm listening to your speech for the first time, your story. I'm going to come back to you and say, I don't know what that means. That's confusing to me. What was your point here? And it's same concept.
Right.
All right, let's go to our third question, which is, how can managers build trust with employees? And I'm going to go back to that we talked earlier. Every word, we can't assume we know what it means, and trust is one of those. So how can they build trust with employees?
I have a lot of fun with this, because I think that team building, trust building, open lines of communication really should be fun. And I think that as we're working with our combination of remote or these sort of hybrid different people, is to sort of take time out of the workday to have fun, to allow people to really get to know the employees that they're working with. And, storytelling is a big one. There's icebreakers. I have a lot of icebreakers that I coach my clients on, so that every meeting starts with an icebreaker or finishes with an icebreaker. So you end on a positive note, you start on a positive note, and you're going to build trust as you let people get to know each other in a more informal setting. And I think Zoom kind of did that. I mean, you're seeing me in my home office. And so you're going to see different things around my house, or you're going to hear a dog bark or a child scream, and you're going to be like, okay, I get it now. This person's a real person. They're just not a talking head. So a couple of the activities I like to encourage are offsite retreats, team building activities, whether they invest in a half day, 4-hour workshop, or whether they pull the C-suite together for 2 or 3 days of a strategic planning retreat. I always like to host activities like a wisdom walk. I got this idea from David Pearl. He does a program called Street Wisdom, and just bringing people together outside of their normal environment, which has been crazy during COVID, because what that can mean is that everybody's on Zoom, even though they're working down the hall from each other. Right. Or you find us in Los Angeles, we can find a safe space outside. Or I've checked out some retreat facilities, so I'm very prepared to tell people where the best spots are to fly a group in. So just building trust is about investing time and energy, and making sure people feel like they've been listened to, feel like they've been heard.
And you hit on storytelling, which obviously is my world. I love that. That is the greatest way to break down barriers fast, is to give some of those origin stories, those experiences. And when you were talking, I was remembering what a big deal it was. If you remember back in March of 2020, there was this, I think he was a financial expert. He was being interviewed on Zoom. It was on one of the big TV shows. And all of a sudden his daughter walked in. And she was like 3 or 4, just babbling on, just oblivious. And he was mortified.
Yeah.
And that thing went viral.
Right.
And I thought, that's a humanizing moment. He didn't understand.
Yeah.
He was mortified because he thought he had to be, I think he was British. So prim and proper. And, right. Oh my God, darling, you must leave the room. It's like, no, we loved it.
Yes, exactly.
Because we've all had that moment since.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that there's some creativity and some spontaneity, and there can also be some planned creativity and spontaneity. Do you remember when they had llamas and I don't know, sheep were like photobombing into Zoom calls and just break up monotony? I thought that was deliciously delightful. I thought that was great. And I've done groups where I've done a team building group where I will ask everybody in the room to go off camera for a minute and just go get something out of their room that speaks to them, something that's sitting on their desk, or they can go to their kitchen or their kids' room. And I want them to come back and share what that item is that speaks to them. What is it, something in your house or on your desk that has a story behind it? Share something that speaks to you. What calms you? What are you proud of? And I have all sorts of icebreakers along those lines, and it really does help people get to know each other. So a lot of networking is key.
I love that, Liz. And I talk to people more and more. I've really been on this push lately to help people understand the curse of knowledge. Yeah. And it's not just from a business standpoint. I used to focus on the business aspect, that your topic so well that you don't assume everybody else does. Your life so well. Don't assume that those moments that happen to you aren't relatable.
Right.
You don't need to have climbed the 7 peaks on 7 continents, or driven a race car at 230 miles an hour, or anything like that. Those aren't relatable.
Yeah.
What's relatable is kid walked through screaming, crying. Right. Or here's a baseball from when I was a kid. Those are terrific moments.
Yeah. And people can use those to connect. So the similarities can be discovered, or the opposites can be discovered. And I used to coach a lot of lawyers that were just burned out, didn't want to be lawyers anymore. They were just frustrated and angry. And what I said was, well, isn't there somebody else at your law firm that can help you or support you? And sometimes I would get, no, I'm the only one. I've got to entertain the clients. I've got to take them out to dinner. And then I've got to be, at the court early in the morning. And I'm burning the candle at both ends. And now I'm married and I have 2 kids. And it's harder for me because they want me home at dinner and I have to entertain these clients. And I remember coaching a client once and I said, well, there's a problem that potentially has a solution if you'll tell someone that story that you just told me, that your kids are home and you want to tuck them into bed. And sure enough, this lawyer in particular, he called me 2 or 3 weeks later and he's like, you'll never believe it. And I go, what? And he goes, well, one of our top guys in the office, he just got divorced. And I said, that's horrible. That's terrible. And he goes, no, it's a wonderful thing because now he's free to go out to dinner, take the clients out to dinner. And he wants to go out to dinner because he doesn't want to cook and stay home by himself. And so I'm going to take all his early morning cases and he's going to take all my evening, dinner time cases. And that never would have come up if either of those two hadn't shared a personal story. And that got personal.
Yeah. And the vulnerability, I know that word tends to be used a lot today, but what does, again, here's another term that we need to dig in. It means being willing to share a painful part of your life, not for therapy. We always tell people this is not the stage or the camera is not the place for therapy, but it's to show your weakness.
Yeah.
When I was a financial advisor, I actually went through a divorce and a bankruptcy within 9 months of each other. And I wouldn't tell anybody because I thought in my role as a financial advisor, I can't share that. People will look down on me. And one of my boss at the time said, Michael, 5 years ago, I went through a bankruptcy. My business just got caught up in it was the 2002 recession. He said, I got my licenses and I didn't hide from it. And he was not kidding. My stories got far better because I was willing to say, look, this is life. It happens. And people are drawn to that. That's what it means to be vulnerable in business storytelling.
Yeah. And I think that's also key with managers and employees. And it shocks me when I'll have an employee come to me and they'll say, you know what, you have to help me find another job. I need to quit. And when I dig in, I get stories like the client that got promoted to manager, which meant he was supposed to open early in the morning. But yet again, he had kids to take to school. And he's like, I can't be the manager because I can't be there at 6 o'clock to open. I can't get there till 8. And I was like, well, did you tell your boss? And he was like, no, I can't do that. I'm like, yes, you can. Your boss promoted you because you're very good. You're very talented. You want the job. Don't quit the job. Let's just communicate. And so a big part of what I do is walk my clients off that I'm going to quit or get fired shelf. And I talk to managers about people that they're afraid are going to quit or that they want to fire. And I say, well, let's talk. Bring me in to coach that employee because one of 2 things will happen. That employee will either open up lines of communication and figure out what they need to do better to stay on that job, or they'll realize this job is no longer the right fit for whatever reason. And then they'll go without a fight because they have come to the conclusion. So it's a little bit of a fun outplacement job that I have because I go in and make things better, or I make it better for the person that's not happy where they are and they leave. And so it's really kind of a fun combination of coaching.
Liz, I've given a lot of focus in the last couple of years to one simple idea, and that is whether it's politics or it's race relations, gender relations, business relations, it's all about communication.
Yeah.
And I know that's oversimplifying, but if we would get clarity on these issues, we wouldn't have 3/4 of the problems we have.
Right.
I'm thinking about this situation where somebody says, well, I can't get up at 6 a.m. I got to take care of my kids. Did you tell them? No. Why? Because I'm afraid.
Right.
That's what it boils down. It's fear. It's fear of communicating that I might hear no. I might get in trouble. I might get maybe it's part of just being mature. I'm 58 now. And it's like, I'm going to respectfully tell you how I feel. And if we can't work it out, we can't work it out. But most of the time it gets worked out, especially when somebody like you is involved.
And it always seems in retrospect, when my clients like circle back, they're like, oh, I wish I'd thought about it this way, because it is a little bit about their confidence too.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I've got a brochure that I'm working on that talks it through, and it's clarity and connection and communication for continuity. Because I knew you were going to ask me, well, what do managers do to build up the employees? And I go, well, you got to be clear. And my favorite letter of the alphabet is C, because it is about communication and collaboration and continuity. It all just kind of creativity. It all just sort of stems around the letter C. So I've had a lot of fun in some of the programs I offer that we just go on a roll with, what's your favorite letter that begins with C? And people will come up with things like colors, and somebody else will say calculators, and they're at odds, and yet you need them both in a company.
Yeah.
You gotta have somebody watching the calculator and somebody else with the colors. And they may not think on the same terms, and they might not work in the same department, but companies need all those different pieces of the puzzle in order to be successful.
And this just popped into my head. When you get clear on your C's, you can clearly see where your problems are.
That's a pretty good one. That's right.
That's worth every penny you paid to be on this interview today.
I think that's a mic drop. Can you repeat it? Right. I mean, yeah, that's a nice close.
We're almost there. But if people want to get copies of this brochure that you're putting together when it's done, and they want to take a deeper dive, I know they can reach you at Mrs. Liz Mohler, correct? Is that how I would say it?
That's my personal email. Yeah.
At Gmail. And you can go to lizmohler.com. And I'm going to put these in the show notes underneath, so you can screenshot it if you want. There's also a video that Liz sent me a link to. I'm going to put in. It just shows her talking about how to uncover your best values. Anything else you want to share, Liz, before we close up here?
I think the clarity, closing conversation, the favorite letter C is a great close for it. So thank you so much for inviting me on, and good luck with all the rest of your interviews. I think they're going to be great. I know you've got somebody exciting coming up. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for that. And that's a great segue before we close out. If you want more information about your presentations, your stories, you can go to my virtual business card. Again, I'll put a link below. And if you want to schedule an appointment, get some free reports, do that. And then as Liz set me up for next week, I'm going to be interviewing a gentleman coming soon, coming attractions to a live stream near you. Gentleman named David Karasek. David was a 2012 Olympian swimmer for the country of Switzerland. He now works on mindset in business. Think like an athlete, how to prepare and play like a world-class athlete. So join us for that next week. We look forward to seeing you. Have a great weekend. Thanks again, Liz, for your insights on how we can overcome the problems of the Great Recession, the Great Resignation, and keep our employees staying with us.
Right. Thanks.